We found this particular book in the public domain, public access. No copyright infringement was intentional. This is the Grand Bible. Foreword and introduction. Foreword. The Grand Bible is not a religious work in a closer sense of meaning, but an encyclopaedic compilation of texts that have been used not only in a religious context, but have implication on philosophy, way of life, culture, literature, ideologies, politics and jurisprudence. It took more than 6 years to search for these texts, analyse, introduce and compile them with all the necessary details of information. Many of those texts represent the earliest examples of written and authorised law in history, law that all too often make the believers subject to taxation or victims of ideologies. These compilers or authors believe that everyone has the right to be informed and ought to have the chance to get all relevant texts as efficiently and rapidly as possible. This is the reason why they packed into the Grand Bible over 900 complete sacred books or manuscripts together. The Grand Bible is intended as a text for straightforward reading. David Starkey is one of the many capable historians of our time who understands it to assemble historical facts in a logical way and present them as eloquent narrative with cohesion or understanding that everyone can follow with ease. In 2017 he published a BBC documentary called Reformation, Europe's Holy War, in which he compares Luther's Reformation with our modern upheavals of woke and jihad. It is worthwhile to hear what Starkey says, because religion is in least cases just about God. It is about precepts and their subsequent laws. It is about power, struggle and often violent ways on the road to salvation. And it is about doctrines and ideologies connected to a divinity, and therefore it is also about administrative positions of the clergy and taxation with which the members of that clergy can stay in power and can control the masses. There has never been religion for personal use only. Religion as a private belief is a new thing, and this only in the Western world. Our limitless individualism has not yet reached the other belief systems. These are facts that we always must keep in mind when we think and talk about other religions. Starkey introduces his film with a powerful message. The Reformation, Europe's Holy War film. We live in an age of religious extremism, an age of terror and violent slaughter. We are locked in a bewildering ideological battle with religious fundamentalism. It is a battle that has taken most of us by surprise because religious fundamentalism seems so odd, so alien to our own easygoing way of life. But you know, it is not. We have been here before, here at home, here at the very heart of our own civilization. Exactly 500 years ago, a breach within Christianity tore Europe, England and the Church apart. It was the same literalism, the same passionate intensity, the same apocalyptic violence as now. It is our very own jihad. It is called the Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was also a political and cultural revolution. It unleashed bloodshed, terror and the destruction of religious art, a combination we recognise all too well. It began with a provincial German monk, and it threatened the most powerful institution in the Western world, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, with destruction. In England, it led to a hard Brexit, 16th century style, as King Henry VIII broke with Rome and declared himself supreme head on earth of the Church of England. It was a tale of espionage, enhanced interrogation and horrific death. There was a handful of brave and inspired souls who fought to introduce the new ideas, and the authorities fought back savagely to stamp out the infection. So how did one man's simple act of protest in the backyards of Germany spark a violent revolution that would transform England, Europe and the Western world? In the early 1500s, the Roman Catholic Church shaped every aspect of human life. And here in Rome, its head, the Pope, ruled a spiritual empire bigger than that of the Caesars. It is hard to overestimate the power of the Catholic Church in the late Middle Ages. It was a vastly wealthy bureaucratic machine. the very heart of Europe. It controlled education, media, family law. It had its own private language in Latin. The clergy, whatever their nationality, swore obedience to the Pope, whose toe even kings knelt on the ground to kiss. But his greatest power was over men's minds. Churches were dominated by a huge painting of the Last Judgment. When Jesus' judge sentenced each soul to the joys of heaven or the eternal torments of hell, it was a terrifying vision. The Church mitigated its stark horror by the doctrine of purgatory. This was an intermediate state between heaven and hell, where the not too sinful soul was purged of its offences and made fit to enter paradise. You could reduce the amount of time you spent in purgatory by doing good works, saying prayers, going on pilgrimages, giving to the poor, or you could draw on the good works of others. Jesus, the saints, the Virgin Mary, whose transcendent goodness had endowed the Church with the treasure of merit. The Pope dispensed in return for considerations, of course. This treasury in the form of spiritual IOUs, known as indulgences, and IOU, abbreviated from the phrase IOU, is a document acknowledging debt. These were printed bits of paper that in return for cold hard cash absorbed the soul of its offences and acted as its passport to paradise. Indulgences were often sold to finance church schemes, and in 1517 the Pope's pet project was the rebuilding of St. Peter's on a magnificent scale. Indulgences were sold across Europe. There was even a catchy advertising jingle. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. It was as though the Church had forgotten Christ and become fixated on wealth. And for one German monk this was an abomination. On the 31st of October 1517, Martin Luther very publicly denounced the scandal. According to legend, he strode through the town to the great doors of All Saints' Church and hammered up a document for all to see. It was his 95 Thesis, a mere 95 points of contention with the Church's teachings on sin and penance. Were these the brave hammer blows of fate against the old order? As the traditional story goes, or was it the equivalent of pinning an agenda on the university notice board, as revisionists suggest? Actually, it does not much matter, since nobody disputes the magnitude of the results. Luther's protest would plunge Europe into 2 centuries of religious war, unleashing bloodshed and brutality across the continent, all in the name of God. Martin Luther was an unlikely revolutionary. In 1517 he was a 33-year-old monk and professor of biblical theology at the University of Wittenberg in Saxony. Saxony was just one of a jigsaw, a small one of German-speaking states that comprised present-day Germany. Each had its own ruler, but all fell under the overlordship of an elected monarch, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was crowned by the Pope, and all was subject to papal authority and taxation. In the introduction to his thesis, Luther wrote of his wish to stir up debate. A new invention allowed him to succeed beyond his wildest dreams. Just over 70 years earlier, Johannes Gutenberg had developed his printing press. This piece of technology would transform Luther from a little-known monk and academic into Europe's most published author and a wanted man. Luther originally wrote the 95 Theses in Latin, the language of academic and theological discourse. But even within the Latin of the thesis, Luther showed himself aware of that wider audience outside the universities. And 9 of the theses list the sharp arguments that the laity were using against indulgences. And how Luther asked, are we going to answer those arguments if the Church does not reform itself? Well, of course, the Church showed no sign of reforming itself. So what Luther did was to write a tract. He called it A Sermon on Indulgences and Grace. And he wrote it in German, and he had it printed. Experts still marvel at the extraordinary impact of Luther's sermon. Professor Andrew Pettigrew of University of St. Andrews replies to David Starkey, this was a work which propelled Luther to the front ranks of European thought and theology. Until that point he had been writing in Latin. But when he did this and published these 20 short propositions in German, Starkey, just 1 second. So the form in German very closely echoes the 95 Theses. These are numbered points. Pettigrew, they are numbered points, but they are reduced, so we have 20 instead of 95. I think this is a work of instinctive brilliance. I mean, he calls it a sermon, but it is nothing like a sermon. Sermons are meant to be endurance tests of repetition and reiteration. And this can be read aloud in 10 minutes. It is 20 short, snappy points, and it is published in Wittenberg. But unlike the 95 Theses, which circulated only in the intellectual community, this went viral, spread like a virus, immediately. It was reprinted in Leipzig, in Nuremberg, in Augsburg, and in Strasbourg as well. So by the end of 1518, there were at least 14 editions of this circulating. And by 1520, Luther had written something like 60 original works. Collectively, they had sold several 100,000 copies, and Luther was now the most published author in the history of printing. And that is an extraordinary transformation for someone who 5 years before had written precisely nothing. Starkey understands that language is the main key if we want to fully grasp what religion is all about and how it works. In March 1518, just 5 months later after Luther's protest in Wittenberg, a copy of the original 95 Theses arrived in England, sent by the Dutch humanist scholar Desiderius Erasmus to his friend and fellow scholar Thomas More, who just joined the inner circle of the government of Henry VIII. Both of them had written on the corruptions of church and state, but they had kept their satire safely in Latin. Presumably, they thought that Luther would do the same. Luther, however, had other plans. He knew if he was serious and if he wanted to change anything, he had to address the masses in their own language and not to the scholars. Starkey. In Wittenberg, Luther's attack on indulgences was evolving into fundamental doctrines. The key one, raising the power of personal faith above the remedies offered by the hierarchy of the church. Mankind was saved not by prayer or fasting or indulgences, but only by faith in Christ, as told in the New Testament. Anything else was a corruption, an obstacle, and that included Rome. Just like Sayyid Qutb, or his brother Muhammad Qutb, the teacher of Bin Laden, the so-called Islamists of our time, Luther wanted to go back to the roots of his religion, and he only could achieve that by using the language of the people. Starkey. On the 15th of June 1520, after 4 all-day meetings, the Pope and his council issued a formal decree known as a bull, or a papal bull, right? Luther was given 60 days to recount or be excommunicated, which meant expulsion from the church and condemnation to the eternal fires of hell. His works were ordered to be burned. Far from backing down, Luther seemed energized, liberated even, and in a matter of a few mere weeks produced 3 crucial works that between them amounted to a manifesto for a political and religious revolution. The most important of them was added to the Christian nobility of the German nation. Writing in German, Luther called on the German princes unilaterally to reform the German church and rescue it from the clutches of Rome that was bleeding Germany dry. On the 10th of December 1520, he publicly burned the papal bull. There could be no going back. In January 1521, Martin Luther was formally excommunicated from the Catholic Church. 2 months later, he was charged with heresy and summoned to a hearing in front of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and representatives of the Church. The imperial diet, as it was known, was to be held in the German city of Worms. Luther's survival had to date been ensured by Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony. Frederick now secured a promise of safe passage, and Luther set out. If the Catholic Church was hoping to destroy Luther at Worms, it had badly miscalculated the popular mood. Everywhere he went, he was hailed as a hero. 100 horsemen rode through the city gates to escort him inside as he descended his carriage. A monk reached out to touch the hem of his robe by taking on the power of the church. Luther had become a local legend, a figurehead for a populist anti-establishment movement that was spreading across the German-speaking states. As resentment about taxes and foreign interference grew, the Pope's ambassador in Worms was horrified as he reported back to Rome. The whole of Germany is in full revolt, he wrote. 9/10 raised the war cry, Luther, whilst the watchword of the other 10 who are indifferent to Luther is death to the Roman Curia. Summoned before the Diet, Luther was ordered to renounce his heretical writings. He refused. Here I stand, he is supposed to have declared. I can do no other. Whilst the Emperor Charles V and the Diet were debating Luther's fate. Luther's safe conduct was honoured and he was allowed to leave Worms. Agents of Luther's protector, the Elector Frederick the Wise, charged with bringing him to a place of safety, brought Luther to Wartburg Castle in Saxony, where he went undercover. He grew his hair and beard and became Junker Jörg or Squire George. Up to now, the Bible was not only a sacred text but also a secret text, which was not available to laymen, ordinary common people, peasants, etc., who could not speak and read Latin. And a main doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church was to keep it like that. Priests of the church were in charge to interpret the contents of the Bible to the ordinary people, and by doing so they kept control over the contents that had been delivered to the audience. Luther was aware that his reformation would not succeed when the people could not read the Bible. He was an accomplished linguist, fluent in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, as well as many German dialects of the north and the south. So he wasn't proficient in the ancient Aramaic. Just to note that. Confined to his room, Luther embarked on the next stage of his religious revolution. The medieval church used St. Jerome's 4th century Latin translation of the Greek New Testament. Known as the Vulgate, it was treated as the sole authoritative text, and crucial Catholic doctrines depended on its particular choice of words. All Luther's religion was rooted in the Bible. He believed in sola scriptura, that the Bible was the sole infallible guide to faith and practice. So Luther decided to use his time in the Wartburg to start afresh and to make his own new translation of the Bible from the original Greek into German. But it was to be his German, pungent, pithy and comprehensible by all Germans, north and south, and above all, it was to be Luther's reading of the Bible. Published in September 1522, Luther's Bible began to fix a standardized modern German language. It forged a growing sense of nationhood and national identity among the German states, and that helped turn Luther's religious revolution into a political revolution as well. Luther's revolution now threatened to carry all before it. The princes were attracted by the political and economic pride gave them of the common people, by the freedom and the autonomy that it seemed to promise them. The term Protestant was coined in 1529, and in 1531 the Lutheran cities and principalities united themselves into a defensive alliance known as the Schmalkaldic League, German Schmalkaldischer Bund, from the town of Schmalkalden in Thuringia. In little more than a decade, half of Germany had gone Protestant, gone Lutheran, as Europe began to fracture along religious lines. It would be engulfed by apocalyptic violence, waves of holy war, terror and iconoclasm of the kind we are all too familiar with today. Then the name of the translator or translators, if available, the year of publishing, if known, and after that a short comment on origin or where this document is in circulation. 2. Each entry begins with its name as title in bold capital letters. 3. Below this name has been placed all alternative names that this entry might have. Then mentioned the source or authorship of the document and the range of dating, meaning the period of time the text origins, and the translated by the full name. 4. After that is given a short introduction of the text, particularly when the text is not well known to the general public. 5. These authors, these compilers, have left text from the Bible, the Quran or other books in their original state. They always display the full text here or within, not abridged or otherwise shortened versions. They all decided to publish within this book. The Quran, in the chronological order proposed by Theodore Neldeke, that displays the chapters according to the time sequence in which Muhammad received his revelations. This makes the Quran easy to understand, particularly when read with the Seerah, the biography of Muhammad, side by side. It clearly shows that the Quran is actually two books with different sets of contents in one binding. This explains the dualistic nature of Islam and its seemingly contradictory ideologies. 7. The reference numbers have been left in, or the names of the chapters, paragraphs, or verses unchanged. They have exchanged most Roman numerals for Indian numerals because they are easy to read and occupy less place. They have removed 9. They have removed most scientific notes, footnotes, side notes, references, brackets, and other things that interrupt fluent reading because they wish to give the reader the naked text so that they can build their own opinion about them. However, they had allowed notes to remain, or even added some, only when they are really needed, or were really needed. They are displayed in brackets within the text body. 10. Before the introduction of this book, they inserted 60 image plates showing some of the used documents in the original appearance, including coins and 4 script tables. 11. At the end of the book, you will find additional text in the appendices and also a general bibliography of listed books and the sources that will help you to find the original work used in the Grand Bible. 12. The Grand Bible is available as a searchable PDF document. It means that anyone can search for a word or phrase when a document is open. Simply click on Edit, then on Find, then type the wanted word in the search field, then click Enter. Click Enter again to go on with the search of the same word. You can copy parts or entire text right from this PDF or the PDF and paste it into a .doc.txt, RTF, or any other text document. You can also print the PDF either in A4 format or in a larger A3 format. And it has a word about the translators. Notice that many of the newer translations in the Grand Bible are subject to copyright. The translators have done an amazing work. They believe that showing their translation supports their culturally and historically valuable work and is a necessary act. However, as all texts in the Grand Bible are available on the internet for free, the Grand Bible too is a non-profit publication. When quoting, please mention the name of the translator. You may share this work with anyone. However, any commercial distribution of this work is prohibited or not allowed. On grammar, they have chosen to display in the Grand Bible the English translations which are known as King James Version, quite simply because most experts believe that it is the best English translation available. There are at least 2 crucial facts why the King James Version is seen as the very best version. First, the King James Version is written in a way that most English speakers can understand. It largely uses the spoken language of the common people. Yeah, but the thee, thou, thy, though, can be quite a pain in the butt. That's probably why they made the new one. The new King James Version made it a hell of a lot easier in modern day English for people to read and understand. Unless you're a great Romeo and Juliet fan, Shakespeare fan. There are at least 2 crucial facts why the King James Version is seen as the very best version. First, the King James Version is written in a way that most English speakers can understand. It largely uses the spoken language of the common people. The style, however, is so poetic that King James Bible is considered as one of the greatest literary works of the English language ever. That's true. We've come across other people like translators, etc. They've said it's very poetic.